All right, everybody, we're going to start. Only 10 minutes late, not bad. All right, so first off, welcome everybody to BSides Knoxville 2016. Yeah. How many people are new this year? Good. This is the biggest year. It's our second year, so we're expecting, yeah. Hey, we increase. We're doing better. We're expecting 250 people this year. And we have multiple people on the wait list, so if it keeps going this good, we'll just keep getting larger. But thanks everybody for coming out for this. First off, we want to thank all the sponsors, because without the sponsors helping us pay for this, we wouldn't be able to do it at all. First off, our platinum sponsors is Cadre Information Security and Checkpoint Software. You'll see them out front, and Cisco Systems, which you'll see upstairs. Our gold sponsors, you'll see them on your bags. Sword and Shield, they'll be out front over there. They've got some cool giveaways for you. Tenable Network Security, which is going to be over in the KEC. Tech Systems, which is right here in where you walk in the venue. And Opta, which is going to be over in the KEC as well. And then also we've got AppSec Security and RYSC Corp, and they'll be over in the KEC from there. So round of applause for the sponsors. And as you may or may not have noticed, by popular demand, everybody wanted posters last year. We did a run of posters. Everybody gets a poster this year. So it's either orange or blue. It's just a luck thing. Whatever was in your bag, that's what you got. So hope you guys enjoy that. We've also got some other giveaways that we'll be doing during the talks. Books, soldering iron kit, some lock picks. There's a lock pick village again upstairs on the second floor for you to try everything out. So from the logistics side of things, first and foremost, how do you get fed? How do you drink things? We'll go with food first, right? In your bags, there are tickets, okay? Do not lose these tickets. A blue ticket, there's one of them, that is for food. When you want to be fed around lunch, come here in Scruffy's house, this aisle right here. For drinks, we include alcoholic drinks because we know everybody likes to drink, or a lot of people do. So everybody gets 2 tickets, these 2 purple tickets that are in your bags. Don't lose them. That's how you get alcohol. The bar is open now. They do mimosas and whatever you want. So have at it. Just make it through the day, okay? If you drink too much, there's water on the bar too. There is coffee over here in this corner, and the bar also serves fountain drinks, and those are included. So you can have fountain drinks whenever you want. The other thing, logistics-wise, you will notice, wow, this got complicated this year. You will notice there is a wristband. This wristband gets you into the after party tonight, okay? Cool. All right, last but not least, where are all the tracks? We didn't put up signs. Somebody just told me that, so awesome. Main track is here in Scruffy City. KEC will be track number 2, and next door in Prez Pub will be our 3rd track. The 3rd track is only going to be running from 9 to 11, and those are remote talks, okay? Keynote is at 1 today, and check the BSides Knoxville website and sked.org for the schedule for the day. We're going to try to get it on the monitors here so people can see it in the venue as well. But that's it. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Hope you guys have a good time, and let us know if you need anything. So with that, we'll start up the first presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Ariel from Cisco, Stair Center in Cisco. The Stair Center has got a pretty long name. It's a Security, Threat Analysis, and Reverse Engineering Center. We're located in Haifa in Israel. We perform black box testing on embedded devices. We have 2 main teams. The hardware team, which is very much hardware. They do silicon reverse engineering, delayering of chips, using electron microscopes, laser glitching, and all kinds of heavy stuff. And there's the software team, which I'm part of, which we do reverse engineering of anything which runs code. For the past 3 years or so, we've been working with the car industry, mainly North American vehicle manufacturers. We've been helping them test their systems, look for security vulnerabilities before they get sent out to the field. Hopefully we'll find the problems before somebody else finds them. For obvious reasons, I won't be mentioning specific names or models of cars, but it's pretty safe to say that some of you drove in today with cars that we've had a look at in the past. So what we'll be talking about today. First of all, we'll have a look and see from a hacker's perspective how we see a car when we look at it. We'll learn a bit about the ecosystem, connections inside and out. We'll touch a few common security problems that we see. We'll go through a few of our tools, and at the end, to wrap it all up and put it into context, I'll walk you through a project that we did from beginning to end, from the stage of receiving the design and analyzing it until the actual development of an exploit for that car. It's not going to be very deep or very technical. Don't worry, it's more of an overview of the field. The first question to ask is, what is a car? Well, that depends very much who you're asking. Right? If you ask a traveler, he'll probably say it's a vehicle which takes people from one place to another. If you ask a mechanic, he'll say it's an internal combustion engine with a transmission, final drive, wheels, steering, chassis, and all the rest of the mechanical parts of a car. If you ask a hacker what a car is, it's just a pile of computers. There's a whole lot of computers connected inside a car nowadays. I say a pile because there are a few dozen usually in modern cars, all talking to each other. The big difference to remember between this pile of computers and any other computers that you have in your house or office are that these ones are sitting on wheels and you're possibly inside the car driving at 65 miles per hour. So when it's at home, something goes wrong in your computer, if somebody takes it over or crashes something, it's not the end of the world. You might lose some money or lose some data. When you're driving in a car and something goes wrong, it could be very bad. Now, all this stuff has been true for the last, 20, 30 years since they invented fuel injection, probably, I think it was back in the 80s or 70s. But what's new nowadays in the modern cars is what we call a connected car. A connected car is a car with lots and lots of cool attack vectors, or supposedly connection interfaces to the world, right? You have your entertainment system which connects up to the internet to download media and applications and stuff. You have a diagnostic system connecting back to the car's back end to report errors, diagnostic problems, and maintenance and whatever. You have RF connections to your key fob. You have maybe a mobile phone app to remotely start the car when it's cold. You want to start it before you get to the car. You have satellite radio, digital terrestrial radio. Soon cars are going to be talking to each other. As you can see, there are many, many connections, many networks going out of this car. On a personal note, a couple of years ago, our leasing company wanted to upgrade the cars to new cars, and the salesperson was trying to convince me how great this car is. It's fully connected straight to their internet and to their computers. They can control everything. I said, no, thank you. I prefer staying with my old car. Had all these computers talk to each other inside the car, there's a series of buses, of network connections between them. The CAN bus, FlexRay bus, LIN bus, they have different names, but ultimately they're just ways for the different nodes to talk to each other. I don't expect you to read all the specific dots, but you see there are quite a few points connected from one to another in the car, starting from the door handle to the pedals to anything else in the car, airbags, whatever it is. And this trend is increasing, right? The cars of tomorrow are getting more and more advanced. We're seeing more and more interfaces and more automatic features of the car which are computer controlled, like self-assisted parking and all those stuff. One of the main buses in a car is called a CAN bus. It's a very common bus. And these are some of the example messages you'd see running on the CAN bus. There's like the air conditioning control, the radio volume, lights, the cruise control. As you can see, some of these messages are quite harmless. Some of them might be less, because cruise control can control your accelerator and your brakes in the car. The CAN bus, the control area network, is a simple bus. It's a single line or differential two-line bus with a few nodes connected. Pretty standard packet structure. You have an ID and a payload and a CRC and stuff. Anyone who connects to the bus can listen to all the messages and can send messages on the bus. There's no master-slave or any special setup there. Interesting thing to know about the CAN bus is that the ID of the message is also the priority of the message. The message with a lower ID, the message with more zeros, takes precedence over other messages. So if someone is trying to send a message, and at the same time I send a message with more zeros, my message goes through. So it's very easy, once you're connected to the bus, just take over the whole bus and flood it with your messages, or no one else can communicate. Some of you might be aware, some not. You have a clear access to the CAN bus in your car. All modern cars have a connector called the OBD2 connector. It's under the steering wheel. That's what they use in the garage to connect and get diagnostic information and stuff. It's very easy to buy a third-party tool. You can get one from the internet. You can sniff the CAN bus, read the messages. You can write on the CAN bus, and you can experiment with it if you want to, if you're brave enough to try. Okay, in the past, if you wanted to do something bad to someone, you would crawl under their car and cut the brake lines when they're not looking. Excuse me for the photo. It's not really a cutter. It's more of a crimping tool, but it was a good photo. But crawling under a car is, first of all, it's dirty, right? You're lying on the floor, the brake fluid might spill on you. And second of all, it's dangerous as an attacker. You have to get very close. You're actually touching the car. You can get caught. It will be much nicer if you can do the same, much nicer and cleaner if you can just send a CAN message on the bus, which does exactly the same thing. When we look at the attacks on cars, the severity, we grade the severity by the distance from the car. The weakest attacks are the ones that you need physical access to the car, actually plugging in a USB connector or the CAN bus or anything else. You can do bad stuff, but you have to be close. In the same distance, you could have actually cut the brake lines. Further away are attacks from a few meters if you connect to the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or something else. That way you can actually attack a car or open a car from the outside without physically being inside the car or physically touching it. And the best attacks are ones which are done over the internet, from far away. You can actually attack a car anywhere in the world from your... Not back. Hello? Did I lose connection somewhere? Hello? Okay. Okay, you can say that for us the holy grail of attacks is attacking a car from far away from the internet and gaining control over the CAN bus to send arbitrary messages, whatever we want. Let's talk about internet connectivity. How do the cars connect to the internet? Well, it's obviously not wired because they're moving around. That's unless you're in an amusement park in those cars which have that metal thing to the ceiling. And Wi-Fi wouldn't work also because you keep moving around, you get out of range. So the standard connectivity is done through cellular connections, right? Just like your mobile phone. The two standard ways are either go through your actual mobile phone. You set up a hotspot in the phone, tethering, and it connects through your phone to the internet. That's very useful for an attacker because, first of all, we can see all the traffic going through our phone. It helps us analyze the traffic. And second of all, it gives us more attack surface because in this way we can attack someone's phone instead of attacking the car and get inside the stream of data. The other option, which we also see, is that the car itself connects to the internet directly. It has a cellular mobile chip inside it with a SIM card or whatever, and it just goes straight up to the internet. That's a bit harder to get in the middle of that connection. What kind of things we look for? Well, the obvious thing is look for open ports. If someone's listening on some kind of service, an open port in a car or in any computer is just like a door with a welcome mat for a hacker to come in. Just like at home, you wouldn't expect to see open ports in your computer, external facing ports, unless you're trying to host some kind of service. You definitely would not like to see them in cars, but we still do see them sometimes. People leave them open for all kinds of reasons. Now, since they're connecting to the internet, you want the connection to be secure, just like any other computer connecting to a secure site. They use the standard protocols like SSL, secure socket layer, to encrypt and authenticate the connection. But unfortunately, SSL has many, many configuration parameters, and quite often we see that some of them are wrong. It's fair to say that most of the SSL configurations that we've seen, there was something wrong. If it's the wrong cipher suite or something wrong with the keys, or sometimes they have too many certificates. People the car manufacturers don't always realize that a car is not a browser at home. Your browser's got to connect to thousands and thousands of websites, so it needs tons of certificates to connect to all the different places. A car should only connect to one, preferably one or two servers. There's no need to have so many. Having too many certificates in the system can help somebody like us get in with one of the certificates that they enable. An example of configuration problems is in this libcurl, which we've seen used in the past. There are many flags to set. One of them is called verify peer, which means you're doing server-side authentication, checking that the server is who you think it is. The second one is verify host, which says actually check that the server name in the common name in the certificate is the correct name that you're trying to connect to, not another server. So some people think that just setting verify host is enough, setting it to 1 or something. But if you read the man page, it says that when the verify value is 0, the connection succeeds regardless of the names. So if people don't read the fine print in the man pages, it's very easy to make a mistake and let us get in. We've done this more than once in the past by impersonating other servers and finding slight differences in certificates which they weren't looking for. Another interesting thing that you have in cars, less than other computers perhaps, what we call remote commands. This is an example of a mobile app. You might have seen something similar. We haven't looked at this one specifically. I just chose an example which is not from our, from our area. They give you an option to start. Thank you. Gives you the options to start and stop the car from afar, open the doors, unlock, and all kinds of other stuff, check the location in the car park. How do these commands get from your phone or from your computer to the car? There are all kinds of systems. One of them is using special servers, for example, MQTT brokers, which is one kind of system that does this kind of messaging. MQTT broker is a publish-subscribe system. You define queues. You can publish messages to a queue. Anyone subscribed to the queue will receive the message. It's very flexible, very dynamic. You can invent any name of a queue. Just type whatever you want, ABC. If someone registers to ABC, he'll get the messages. It's so flexible that it has many configuration parameters also. And we've seen mistakes in these kind of things too. We've had systems where we could connect from the public internet to a live system, actually. This was a live system. Connect from the public internet to the MQTT broker and send a message to any car on the system or to all the cars at the same time, giving them commands. Sometimes your car goes to sleep. You're parking for a long time. They don't want to be online the whole time. So how do they get a message to the car if you want to send a command? They use SMSs, something called SMS shoulder tap. It's kind of a wake-up package. They have all kinds of formats. Sometimes they have the server URL inside that tells the car where to connect and get commands. Sometimes the actual command is inside. It has some kind of identification. These things too are another way in for us hackers. If there's a mistake in passing the message, sometimes we can find a vulnerability just by sending a malformed message. Sometimes they don't check properly that the server is actually one of their servers, and we can direct the car to connect to our server. All kinds of other funky stuff that can be done through these SMSs. A good solution to all this would be, obviously, to isolate the network, right? There's no reason for me, from a public IP address, to be able to connect to a car, right? The car should be part of a private network for the car manufacturer. No reason for it to be connected to the internet. If you block it off, both for SMSs and for IP, seems like a pretty good solution, right? When a car connects to the cellular operator, it sends the SIM card's ICC ID, some kind of identifier, which connects to the APN, and that gives it an IP address in a specific range, which no one else can access. So in order to access these cars, we need to get a computer somehow inside that network, which gets the same range of IPs to attack somehow. But where can we find a Linux computer inside that network? Well, lucky for us, as we said before, the cars themselves are computers. So in cases like this, when we see this kind of setup, we attack one car locally. Once we have access in that car, we can just hop around to the rest of the network. Obviously, a better solution will be to properly isolate each car from each other and make sure that messages only go to who they're intended to, from the car back to the back end and the other way. It should be some kind of layered security, altogether close the ports, add firewalls and all the configurations, but often enough it's not implemented properly, even in car systems today. Okay, so understand that the attacker is trying to connect to the car from afar. How do we start about getting into the car? How do we start about attacking the computer, even for our testing purposes, even not for a real attack, just to learn about the system? This is a black box system. Well, first of all, for the ports, we do the regular port scanning techniques like you would on a computer, which is easy enough if it goes through your cell phone, like we said before, because a cell phone is a computer also, I can just see all the traffic. How do we do it when it connects straight to the cellular network? Well, for example, in our office in Haifa, we've got this pretty large box called a base station simulator. It's actually like a mobile, it's a cellular tower inside your office. Assuming you don't mind the radiation, you can simulate any operator. You just put all the right parameters. It's actually not that bad. The radiation is sort of pointed at the car. And you can make it connect to the cellular network through our setup. There are also cheaper things like femtocells, which are for home use, but this is a more professional solution which has other capabilities. Now, this kind of cellular connectivity is not something you can do only inside an office, inside a lab. Like a few years ago, there was a project called WASP, which was Ariel surveillance something. I can't remember the acronym. Where they had this drone flying around with Wi-Fi and cellular capabilities to make people connect to the cellular signal. So theoretically, you could float on top of cars and make them connect to you. How else do we try and get in? We use fuzzing techniques like you would in any other system. We've got a tool that was built in a house called Kitty, which is it's more suited for our use for black box testing. And we fuzz all kinds of entrances into all kinds of interfaces into the car. We start with a network fuzzing, both servers and clients which are on the car. We also fuzz the Bluetooth stacks, right? We impersonate a phone and go through the whole pairing process and try find errors in the Bluetooth protocols. We go on the USB stack, right? We see if there's any errors in the USB parsing itself. We have to remember that these cars are often proprietary code. It's not the same, the versions and libraries which have been around our homes for a few years and been tested and debugged. Some of this stuff is quite new code, so there's more chances of finding bugs in them. We also try media formats, right? All the media files and stuff like that. A few years ago, we took over a car through a Bluetooth connection just by giving it a malformed song name in one of the song lists. That was enough to get in. Okay. Another thing we look at when we try to connect to the car is we look for the hardware connections to try and see what's happening in the connections. Now, obviously, this picture is not from a real car because this is a computer from, I don't know, 10 years ago at least. But that's the idea. Where do you find these kind of connections in the car? Right? A car doesn't expose a whole set of connectors to connect to. Well, the thing is, you connect to the back of it. If you wouldn't mind dismantling your car, the whole panel, behind the shiny touchscreen and all the buttons, you have a computer case, and inside you have the motherboard, and the motherboard, it's got all the chips and the connectors. Now, in a production system, there's no reason to have connectors for testing and debug, but often we find test points left on the board. One of the things we look for are JTAG connections. JTAG is the standard for performing on-chip instrumentation and testing chips. Some architectures you get full debugging capabilities in ARM and MIPS. So we look for places like this with 20 connecting points somewhere on the board. Try testing them all. It's pretty hard to find which wire to connect where because it's not labeled, it's not supposed to be used. But there are tools like a JTagulator which sort of brute forces all the connections, sending signals to the wires, trying to find the right ones. If we find the JTAG connection and we manage to connect to it with the debugger, it's game over. We've got full control over the chip. Another thing we often look for and very often find are serial consoles. Right? You have a UART connection to, like many other embedded devices. There's a UART connection for development phase to do stuff. You almost always see something coming out of the console during the boot up, like boot messages of the kernel and all kinds of information which could be useful. In this example here, which is a U-boot system, you see the last line here says, hit any key to stop auto boot, which is something which you would like at your house. So we had this connected to the car, you press enter on your keyboard, and next thing you know, you're in the U-boot menu, which is before the kernel boots, and you can control the whole box and do whatever you want. You have full access to the file system. Sometimes the developers are nicer to us. They actually leave debug logs running the whole time. So while the car is running, you see all kinds of messages explaining what's happening, which is very helpful for an attacker. If they're even friendlier to us, they leave a login console on the serial connection. So you get this prompt username login to connect to the car, and if we can crack the password, then we're in and we have control over the car. And if they're even friendlier than that, they just have a root shell straight away. You just connect the keyboard and you're in, full control. These things exist in our cars. Another connection point which I mentioned before is the CAN bus. Right? We connect to the CAN bus. We have all kinds of tools for sniffing. We listen to the communication. We press different buttons in the car, see what goes on the bus to learn what commands they use. And on top of CAN, there are all kinds of other protocols. CAN is a low-level layer. There are other higher-level protocols like UDS, which is a universal diagnostic service. That's how you check all those diagnostic messages on your car, the different error values and stuff. But it has all kinds of cool commands like reading and writing memory, or sometimes you can enter programming mode and actually reflash the whole CPU through the CAN bus. If these things are left open, that's a big problem. And the authentication system, they exist some kind of mechanism, but they're not very secure and they're not always done properly. Okay. So we had a look at the box, we tried to attack it, fuzzed it, maybe something crashed, but still we don't know what it looks like inside. This is a black box. We need to get the firmware to actually understand what's running inside, to see what the vulnerability is and see how to attack it. Where do we find the firmware for the car? One place to get it is to download from the website. If you check in your car's manufacturer's website, you'll often see in the customer support page there's a place to download updated firmware for your entertainment system. That's one place to get the code. It could be encrypted sometimes, but it often isn't. Often it's just signed, so we just download it and we can open up the code and have a look. If it doesn't exist on your website, you can be sure it exists in the local garage. Right? The dealership has to update the software. All these cars are updatable to fix bugs and to revocate certificates and new features and stuff. So you just have to find the right person, pay him a bit, and you get your firmware. Sometimes, if we can't find it anywhere else, we can't get it from the internet or anywhere else, we actually lift the physical flash from the board. Right, a regular PC keeps all the programs and code inside a hard disk. In an embedded system, it will be in a flash memory. So we pick up the flash memory from the board, and we've got these flash reading machines which reads out all the data from the flash. This is especially useful in the systems which have encrypted code. Sometimes the code is downloaded from the internet encrypted, but when it's installed, they often decrypt it during installation. So on the flash, it's already clear. So it's a good place to find the code. The problem is that it's quite destructive. Very rarely we manage to put the flash back and get the car to work again. So we need a few sets before we start trying these kind of things. Another option that we do sometimes, if we're lucky, sometimes we have the serial console, some kind of access to the system before we get the firmware, and then once we're inside, we just funnel it out through a USB or SSH or any other way that we can. Okay, so now we've got our firmware. We have it in the hand. We've got to understand what's inside. It's this big blob of binary data. Doesn't make much sense. It's not a nice wrapped installation package like you would see on a computer. We use tools like binwalk, which helps us analyze the blob and tell us where there are file systems, where there are all kinds of zip files and all kinds of other formats. We start extracting it bit by bit and unpacking them. Once we have it unpacked, we use our favorite disassembler, IDA Pro. That's our main tool that we work with to actually reverse engineer all the code and understand what's happening inside. Now, part of the challenges are that there are many different architectures. This is not just your x86 home PC or just your ARM mobile phone. We see all kinds of stuff. We see ARM, MIPS, PowerPC, V850, all kinds of some less common architectures. First of all, the first challenge is actually to identify what architecture you're looking at. If you open IDA with the wrong architecture, it can't read the code. So it takes us a while sometimes to, by reading the chip engravings and stuff, to see what we're actually dealing with. And sometimes, unfortunately, IDA doesn't know of that architecture. Recently, we had I think it was last year, we had a new version of V850 chip, which is a Renaissance chip. IDA just didn't disassemble it properly. And we had to write our own IDA processor, which took us quite a while to teach IDA. But, we read the instruction manual, and we taught IDA how to actually understand the code. Needless to say that people who know IDA, there's also a decompiler tool, Hexrace, which is very helpful when you're doing x86 or ARM. It actually decompiles the code to like human-readable C language. But many of these architectures don't have it, so we're stuck with the disassembly. Another one of the challenges we have is the memory layouts. Often these binaries are not organized in a known format. It's not an ELF or executable or something which has a header which explains how it should be opened when it's running. So IDA doesn't know how to read the code, which parts are code, which are data, how are they aligned. So we have quite a challenge sometimes to get this blob of data into something that makes sense. We have to start shifting parts around. We've got all kinds of scripts. We try to look for cross-references between different commands, looking for strings, finding printf functions, all kinds of tricks to get it aligned properly in the memory and to understand what we're looking at, which is code and which is data. At the beginning, it's just a big mess. Sometimes when we start, I forgot to mention these firmwares can be gigabytes of size. They're monstrous. And there's no way you can disassemble a whole firmware, read through the whole thing, and understand all the works. We have to pinpoint our efforts to places that interest us. How do we know the interesting parts? If there are strings or other kind of debug symbols, that points us in the right direction. If there aren't symbols, we look for other kind of anchors inside the code. For example, if we know that the chip has a flex CAN interface for talking to the CAN, and we see the datasheet that it's at a certain address, we'll look for that address, that number 209.000, somewhere in the binary. Once we find that, we'll start constructing our function, which is, we call it, configure CAN. Then we'll find the other one, which has the control register, and we'll call that function write CAN. Then we'll start building up backwards from those low-level blocks until we get the whole area of code which interests us. One thing which is very helpful, I mentioned before, are strings and debug symbols in the code. Look at this example function here. There's some kind of a subroutine, receives a number, compares it to a structure, and returns a 0 or a 1. We have no idea what it does. But if the developer was nice enough to leave this kind of string inside, which says software update version is less advanced than the version, it's obvious what it does. It's very, very very often we still see strings in the code, and the amount of effort with or without strings, it's uncomparable. It can take us days to understand a piece of code without strings, or minutes if you have the strings. And even though it's so easy to take them out and they're so important, developers often still leave them in production systems too often. Other things that we find which help us when we're attacking a system are all these leftover debug tools. Sometimes they leave debuggers inside, like a GDB server or QCon and QNX systems, stuff like that, all these generic tools. Sometimes we see proprietary test tools. Proprietary tools can help us in all kinds of ways. Sometimes they help us understand the flow, like if there's a function, a script that says flash a secondary CPU, and it has all the steps, that helps us understand how it works. Sometimes the tools themselves are vulnerable, we get in through the tools, all kinds of useful things that we find there. Sometimes we also find these hidden backdoors that the engineers left inside, all kinds of menus, press these buttons, do this, or if you have a certain file name on the USB key, like if it's a media file it plays, if it's a bin file it installs the firmware, but if it's a certain directory with a special name and an SH at the end, it will run a shell script directly. Gets us straight in. For some reason people think that these kind of secrets can't be seen, but they obviously are not experienced enough in reverse engineering, because it's one of the first things you see. Okay, so let's say our attacker managed to attack a process in the car and got in and took over a process which was, say, interfacing the web. And now he's controlling the process. What kind of damage can he do in the car? Well, that depends. If everything runs as root, as often happens in embedded systems, because it's much easier to configure, then you have full control over the whole processor. But when not everything runs as root, when they do have a proper separation for users, where do we look to get privilege escalation? Well, one good place to look is boot up scripts. When the box boots, all the etc init script and stuff like that, they run as root. So we look for errors in those scripts. As I said before, a lot of the code in the cars is not standard code. They have all these proprietary scripts that they added, and they're not always careful enough. For example, this script which we found once, there was a user called Browser who was in charge of browsing the internet, and he had a low privilege. And they had a command to do chown -r on his home directory for every boot up. We don't know why they had this code there for every boot up. We think it was a mistake. It was probably something that you would do one time when preparing the file system, but it was there. So we asked ourselves if, besides being wasteful, if there's any damage that can be done through the script. And the answer is yes, because chown -r follows soft links, symlinks out of the directory. So if you can get a file pointing from your home directory out to a system file somewhere, it will change the ownership to be the ownership of the browser user. Which is exactly what we did. We took over the browser process, we created a soft link to another directory outside, and the next reboot, we had control of other files in the system, and we started from there. Other places we look for privilege escalation are all kinds of IPC daemons. There are lots of processes usually running in these systems, and they communicate between themselves with inter-process communication. It's either some kind of proprietary system, where they have some sockets that they send messages to each other, or standard systems like dbus. If you can send a message from a low privilege process to a high privilege process and make it perform the command, then you're actually adding you're jumping your privilege. But if you find an error in the passing, then it's even better because you can take control over the process. This example here, it's from Charlie Miller's report and from back in August. It says dbus can require authentication on the Jeep head unit. The authentication is open to anonymous action as shown below. And you see someone telling from outside an open port on dbus can send messages to all the processes on this system. Now, I mean, it's probably hard to believe that these things actually exist in cars today. It's so easy to take control of a car, but you can just ask the guy who was in the Jeep that got pushed off the road. These things do exist. Another place we look for is firmware updates, right? Just similar to startup scripts, firmware updates run as root because you have to mount stuff and install stuff and all kinds of heavy things. So firmware update is a good place to get a foothold as an attacker into the system. The firmware itself, as we said, it usually comes from USB or some other source. Could be encrypted, could be signed. Even if it's signed, there's some kind of manifest, like a table of contents, explaining what we have inside the bundle. Usually there's like a list of files and the hashes, and then there'll be a signature file full of all the signatures and cryptographic signatures of all the files. But sometimes in this example here, the signature file itself is listed inside the manifest file. It's not a fixed name. The name is here. So obviously the manifest file itself can't be signed, which means we can play with the manifest file. And all kinds of bugs and stuff in passing the manifest files are often used by us to get inside. Another thing which we see too often is use of the system function command. The system function command takes a string and passes it to a shell. It's a perfect place to get the shellcode insertion into the box. Like in these kind of functions, which install stuff from the USB, it takes a name straight from the manifest file, runs a shell command on it. If you put a semicolon and some other command, you're inside the box. Other more complicated stuff that we do sometimes are TOC2 attacks. It's time of check, time of use. Time of check, time of use is when something is done in a non-atomic manner. Like reading a file from the USB, they read it one time, check the signature. If it's okay, they read it again and install. Now, if you can get in between those two reads and swap the file to something else, you can trick the box into installing something which is not signed, which is exactly what we do. We have a setup using an IMX5 board, which has a USB stack on it, and it gets an image file, which is actually the file system on the USB. And we actually switch the images between the two reads in cases like this. Sometimes you have to have precise timing, sometimes it's easier. It depends on the system. Obviously, secure boot. If the bootloader would actually check the signature of the whole image every time that it boots up to make sure no one's touched it, that's a good help in making your system safer. This does exist sometimes, but not enough. And actually, recently, one of our team members found a bug in the secure boot mechanism and took over the box, even though it had a secure boot inside. Okay, so past this stage, let's say our attacker's inside. He's got root privilege on the main processor. He's controlling all the processes. Can he send in the CAN messages on the car? Can he do bad stuff? Well, that depends. If the application CPU is connected to the CAN bus, then yes. Once you're inside in your root, you can just send using the driver straight on the CAN bus. A better design would be something like this, which separates it to two separate processors. It's something that we often see. The one processor in charge of the entertainment connects to the internet and showing all the movies and stuff, and that's like the less secure processor. And there's a totally separate processor who's in charge of talking to the CAN bus and all the other critical systems on the car. This way, if you take over one, if you compromise one processor, the other one still stays safe. But you still have to send information from one processor to the other, because the main processor wants to read, I don't know, your current speed or get your location and stuff like that. So you define a set of messages going between the processors, a fixed set of messages like an enum, message 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, only safe messages. That's all that goes across on the wire between the two. This is a kind of a safe setup. But something to remember is that if you have two processors with some kind of remote procedure calling between them, that adds another attack surface for us to get in between to attack the processor which is performing the IPC. Often these are proprietary systems, proprietary code writing the RPC between the two processors. This example here, there was a project when we had an ARM CPU, a dual-core ARM. One side, the application CPU was running Linux for the media. The other side was running some kind of a real-time system, with T-engine or something. And they defined a shared memory to get messages from side to side. And in order to use the shared memory, they wrote a kernel model, which you give it some kind of queue, some kind of a queue node. You put it in the queue. The other side will read the message, send the CAN message, etc. But a bug that we found inside the implementation of this driver actually allowed us to gain kernel privileges on the main CPU. And that was from a regular user, so it gave us quite a boost, that mistake they had in the RPC. Okay, now I've got to reach the maybe more interesting part. Now I'll take you through a project from beginning to end to see what it looks like. This project that we received, this was a design that we saw. There was an infotainment unit. I didn't mention it earlier, but we mainly look at the infotainment units because they are the ones that have most connectivity to the internet and to the other stuff. It had the application CPU inside. It was sitting on the CAN bus. And the infotainment unit would connect straight to the internet, to the car vendors' servers, in order to download media and all kinds of applications and stuff. Now, all the communication was done securely and properly with SSL. Anything which had users' passwords or important information was done secure. Besides the media files themselves, which came from all kinds of other CDNs and stuff, they were passed in the clear because there's no need to encrypt music file. But we noticed that besides the music files being downloaded, there was also a terms and conditions page. Just a text page. Those annoying ones that pop up at the beginning when you install an application. It says, do you agree to all the stuff? And you scroll, and you say yes, and whatever it says. This is some kind of radio application. So that was another one of the pages that was downloaded via HTTP and not HTTPS. Okay, so we look at the system to observe it from all sides, see what we can find. First thing we notice from the design is that the application CPU has full access to the CAN bus, like I mentioned before, which is a not too secure design. The second thing was that the firmware was available on the web. So, as we said before, we downloaded the firmware and started reverse engineering it. Another thing which was very helpful, we had the shell console via UART with a login shell. We didn't have the credentials, but we had the shell itself. And the thing which I mentioned before is that there was a web page which was downloaded of HTTP, that one page that we identified in the whole system. Looking at reverse engineering the code and looking at all the components, we noticed that the WebKit library was an old version. Now, this often happens in embedded systems, that the software components aren't updated as frequently as we would like them to be. It's much harder to send out an update to a car somewhere. You have to wait for the next, I don't know, time it goes for service, and it could be expensive. So that don't update the systems as frequently as you would in your home computer. And one of the things we look for are known vulnerabilities. We look in the CVE databases to see if there's anything which we can attack this library. So we saw this, and another thing we saw was that there were some tools still installed in the system. There was QCon, this is a QNX system, which is similar to Linux, but not exactly. It's a bit more complicated because not all the standard tools work. But they do have a QCon, the debugger installed, and they had FTP and some other useful utilities already inside the system, which saved us compiling them and putting them inside. So with all this, we started planning our attack. First thing we did was, as soon as we got the firmware image, we took out the password and shadow files and started cracking the password, the root password, using John the Ripper, one of the tools that cracks password. It takes quite a while. In this case, I think it took about 2 weeks of working. The computer was working. But we had enough to do in the meantime, so we don't care. We just let the computer work in the background, and we were continuing with our reverse engineering. In that WebKit version that we identified, we saw that there was a JavaScript use after free vulnerability. It's a kind of vulnerability which you can, if you allocate a certain kind of structure, then afterward you deallocate it, then you allocate another structure in the same slot, you can get control. And using that that vulnerability, you can actually access, we can get read-write control anywhere in the memory space. This is really cool. It's a really cool bug to attack, really cool vulnerability to attack, but it's quite complicated to get this to work because it's heap memory, and the memory regions, some of them were non-executable and non-writable. It wasn't easy to know exactly what addresses to write and how to do this correctly. But lucky for us, we had the QCon inside, the debugger, and we had a full debugging suite. Actually, QNX give you a client tool also, which has got this graphical user interface. So we checked all the memory regions, we found a place which was writable, and we chose exactly where to write our shellcode attack. And we used this actually to write a shellcode inside the box. So this is what the attack looked like. See, in the system we have the application CPU inside is our attack vector. That's that JavaScript engine inside WebKit. And there's the car vendor's website, and there's our server instead. Now the car wants to connect to their server, but seeing that it's HTTP and not HTTPS, we were able to intercept the communication in the middle and direct it to our server instead. Once we got to our server, we downloaded our page with the terms and conditions, and it had a little iframe with our JavaScript inside. Our JavaScript ran the code inside, and from that it jumped out and it wrote a shellcode and took over the whole application CPU. Now the first thing we did once we were in the application CPU is we used the FTP client which was there, downloading more scripts and more tools of our own. And we set us up like a persistent system which would connect to our server all the time, polling the server, asking for commands. We had the command and control center, like a nice web GUI. I think we called it Yes We Can. And you can just go to that website and type in your commands, and those CAN commands will go straight down the internet into your CAN bus of the car. Now the nice thing is that all the cars of this manufacturer, all the tens of thousands of cars or whatever they were, all connected to the same terms and conditions page. So if we manage to take control of the original server of the terms and conditions and inject our JavaScript over there, we'd have control over all the cars driving around the world at the same time. So we went back to the client with our findings. Got a bit of a fright after this. Don't worry, this was quite a while back. It's been fixed since then. And they gave back the security architecture redesign. And lucky enough, they said it's not enough just to patch that WebKit version. We want a proper design. We're going to assume that the application CPU will always be compromised, which is a good assumption because there are many processes running, many websites and stuff. Someone's going to attack one of the processes on the way. So what they did is they introduced the secondary vehicle CPU, as we mentioned before. This was a V850 chip. It was a totally new design. They had the application CPU and the secondary CPU that were connected over a SPI bus. So we got the system again, and we said, this time we're stumped. We can't get the CAN messages. What can we do? So we looked at it again. What we noticed were the follows. We noticed that the communication goes over SPI. We noticed that only predefined CAN messages can be sent. We even reverse engineered the V850 and saw there was a switch case with a fixed number of messages that it would accept, and that was it, nothing else. We saw that all the firmware is signed. We can't just change the firmware and override that function with something else. We can't patch it. But two interesting points that we did find. One, that the new vehicle CPU firmware is written over the SPI by the application CPU. Right? All the firmware came in through the USB. The application CPU would read the firmware inside, pass it. Some of it would install in its own CPU, and the other part would send over the SPI to the vehicle CPU to install in the vehicle CPU's memory. And the most interesting point was that the signature was verified in the application CPU and not in the vehicle CPU. Right? So the application CPU would check the signature once at the beginning, say it's safe, and then install it in the vehicle CPU. What does this enable us? What happens if we take control over the application CPU like before? Right? We can just ignore the signature checks for the vehicle CPU and send it across, and the vehicle CPU wouldn't check it again, which is exactly what we did. Setup is similar as before. They try to connect to their server and reach our servers. This time we start off by downloading our JavaScript payload and taking over the application CPU just as before. But here was another stage. What we did was we took the vehicle CPU firmware, the original firmware. We after reverse engineering, we understood where to patch the firmware, and we actually patched the function which did the switch case to enable it to receive any CAN message. And seeing that no one checked the signature, no one actually noticed that the binary has changed. So at this stage, using FTP, we actually downloaded a whole firmware image for the second CPU. It took a couple of minutes, but it was worth the wait. And then imitating the SPI commands, I think it was also using one of their tools. They had a tool which did the flashing itself. There was some kind of script. So it was quite easy to understand the protocol over the SPI to send the firmware across. We didn't have to sniff the hardware. We just looked at the software. And using their own tools, we actually reflashed the vehicle CPU from the application CPU. And from here, it continued exactly the same as before. Again, we sent the CAN messages. This attack was actually shown as a demo to some of the managers in that car company. They were quite impressed at the time, and I think it gave a big boost to their efforts in improving the security of their systems. Okay, so let's just wrap it up and conclude what we saw. The first thing is that today's cars contain computers. You have to remember it's a system full of computers. Another thing to notice is that tomorrow's cars are going to contain more computers. Now with all the automatic parking and all these, soon you're going to have cars driving themselves. Even if in the past only some of the system were computerized, now everything is going to be computerized, steering and all. Of course, we should remember that hacking cars is a dangerous hobby. And one of the important takeaways are the security issues that we find in the cars are very similar to other embedded systems. There's nothing new, the regular ports and SSL and shell commands and stuff. It's just the same kind of system. But the thing which is more problematic in the cars is that they're lagging behind the home PC scene by quite a bit, security. I mean, only recently cars started getting connected. A lot of the code is still proprietary, it's not open source, it's not checked enough. So there are quite a few errors to be found. Quite a few vulnerabilities to be found in the cars today, and which can be taken advantage by attackers. That's it. Thank you very much.